like it sounds like a lot of places are doing.
My colleague here at Smith College is Kim Ward Duong, who was a postdoc for 1 year at Space Telescope before coming here to Smith. Last year was her first year. She spent her whole year in Baltimore without ever setting foot in the building.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's been really weird for people who are starting and or ending jobs during this time. Like, I mean, I have coworkers who I didn't meet in person for a very, very long time. It was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We should be able to get them. Yeah, that would actually be, maybe we can test that really quickly on getting them to be on the main screen. Okay. Yep. So I think, let's just go ahead and start. We're now at a couple of minutes past 4. So we're really delighted to be here and kick off the career panel for the symposium. And we have a really excellent lineup of career panelists that we see over here. We have the pleasure to have Dr. Arpita Roy, who is a program scientist at Smith Futures, Professor James Lowenthal, a professor at Smith College, Dr. Ashley Wilkins, a staff member at the U.S. House of Representatives, and Ari Silbert, a machine learning engineer at Bloomberg. So I and Anwar over there, we're going to be chairing we're moderating this session, and we're going to be taking questions from 2 main ways. One of them is Slido, which is a website where it's really easy to submit anonymous questions. This is completely live, so if you do sign on to, if you just go to slido.com, you can put in this code, 1406646, and then you can see the questions that are already posted there. There are a number of different questions that have already been submitted and upvoted and downloaded. So we will be drawing questions from Slido, and because we on the organizing committee wanted to have some way to allow for asking anonymous questions, but we'll also be taking questions directly from the audience, either in person or online. We have posted the link to Slido in the Blue Jeans chat. And for the folks here in person, we also added the Slido code over there on the big board over there. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen over here. And could we in the back try and get the big view of folks over here on the big screen of the career panelists? Would that be easy to do? Awesome. And then, yeah, so then to kick things off, here are our four panelists. And I will go then just on the order of the screen here to give a quick introduction. And then we'll give you maybe 2 to 4 minutes to talk a little bit about your career progression. Maybe you can talk about where you got your PhD, what did you do in astrophysics, and then how you maybe say a few words on how you obtained your current job. And then we'll leave the rest for Q&A. And are there any questions or announcements before we dive in? No? If not, then Ari, you are here at the top, so maybe could you kick this off?
All right, great. So my name is Ari Silbert. I got a PhD in astrophysics at the University of Toronto under Hanno Rain, and did a lot of studying with planets. I was kind of right in the sweet spot of when Kepler was launched, so a lot of my PhD was involving numerical dynamics around planets that we discovered and also calculating some planet statistics. And that was also kind of where I got my first exposure really to software, learning Python, coding, etc. I didn't really get that much in undergrad. That was also where I got my first flavor of machine learning towards the end of my PhD, and ended up having a few publications that were machine learning based. By the end of my PhD, I was starting to get a sense that maybe I didn't want to continue in academia, but I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, what my career path was going to be. So I started a postdoc at Penn State, which is where actually I met Gudmundur. And then from there, after about a year, I pivoted to this 6-week Insight data science program, which is where they only accept PhDs in various disciplines, and they kind of transition you to industry. And I'll definitely admit that I don't feel like, oh, after the 6-week program, now I was like a trained software engineer. Like, you can't really learn that much in 7 weeks. But one thing that was very valuable is they had a lot of connections, a lot of companies that they had partnered with. And so even just getting that exposure and getting my resume at the top of a pile that they would interview me, that was kind of the value of that particular program. And then from there, I was very lucky to get a job at Bloomberg, which one thing I was searching for in particular, which is one of the pieces of advice that I would give maybe someone who's trying to transition out of academia, is that it was a place that is a very established kind of software engineering first based company. My manager was a software engineer, not like a business person at a startup or something like that. I feel like because I was coming from academia, from a physics background, and had only learned to code maybe 5 years ago, let's say, then I was certainly missing a lot of fundamentals of what best computer science and software engineering practices are. And so I didn't want to be the smartest person on my team. I wanted to kind of have those good mentors and that exposure to be able to learn kind of the proper and correct way to do things. And I've been there for 4 years now, and I'll also say now it's kind of official, but in about 2 weeks, I'll be starting a senior machine learning role at Google, and so I'll be moving on from Bloomberg. And I'll probably stop there.
Congratulations, that's great. And,
Thank you.
Arpita, could you go next?
Yeah, sure. So I did my PhD at Penn State. Gumi and I actually are brought up in the same lab. We've built a few instruments together. And so I worked on exoplanet characterization and discovery, particularly with the radial velocity method. And when I started, there was not a good way to find smaller planets. And so we needed to build the instruments to do the science that we wanted to ultimately do. And so I spent a lot of my time developing what we call extreme precision spectroscopy, so getting us closer and closer to that hallowed 10 centimeter per second precision that would allow us to discover Earth-like planets. So I built a few instruments at Penn State, and then I did a postdoc at Caltech, where I built a third EPRV instrument that actually got to Keck maybe 3 days ago. Very exciting. And then after that, I was actually at Space Telescope, where you all are now, and I was on a tenure track astronomer position. And I was in the thick of James Webb commissioning and not thinking about changing jobs at all, on a very firm academic trajectory. when Schmidt Futures reached out to me. And while I hadn't been thinking about changing jobs, I had been thinking about maybe pivoting inside my position to think more about impact and scale and strategy and policy and all of these things that enable science. I was very interested in kind of stepping back from the hands-on research to enabling more research than I or my group could do by ourselves. And so when Schmidt Futures reached out, I noticed a lot of the words in the description of program scientist were adjectives I had been looking at as well. But I had never heard of this place, and science philanthropy was not on my radar at all. And so I honestly thought it was a scam at first because it sounded a little bit too good to be true. So I ended up reaching out to some of the philanthropies we have more experience working with, specifically the Heising-Simons Foundation, which many of you might be familiar with. And I had a really good chat with some of the people there to learn about the landscape of science philanthropy, which is a thriving one that I hadn't really appreciated. And also, they kind of vouched that Schmidt Futures was legit. And so I started talking to the team here. And it just seemed like a fantastic opportunity to do things at scale. There's a lot of interest here they're already doing some astronomy, but they want to do more. And so they need experts to kind of guide where support would yield the most results. One thing I really, really like about this job is that they are extremely risk tolerant. They love risk, which is a very nice complementary funding pathway to places like NASA and NSF that by their very nature have to be a little bit risk averse. And so I think there is a very promising partnership here of government and industry and private philanthropy going forward. And I'm excited to work in this space and see how we can shape the future of science and basically enable more science than is currently being done.
Thank you, Arpita. That was great. And Ashley, would you mind going next?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Ashley Wilkins. I work for the House Science Committee on the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, and I can talk more about what that actually means, but I think I'm here kind of representing the policy, science, space policy pathway. I got my PhD in 2017 from the University of Maryland with Drake Deming. I worked on transiting hot Jupiter atmosphere characterization mostly, primarily with Hubble, which means I'm among the group of people whose thesis has now been made totally obsolete by JWST, which is extremely exciting. If, there's only a tiny little bit of bitterness there, but mostly it's very, very exciting. So I was at University of Maryland, so not actually that far from Space Telescope. I'm very familiar with the folks at Space Telescope from working on Hubble. Right after I finished my PhD, which was in 2017, I served as the Bacall Public Policy Fellow at the AAS. If you're not familiar with that, that is, there's one person, it's sort of a postdoc position, but it's not necessarily limited to any particular career level other than just for astronomers who have gotten their PhD. It just happens to have been postdocs, sort of people straight out of or after one postdoc in the past several rounds. In that position, I was there for about a year and a half, and I worked for the AAS, and it's sort of a dual purpose role where it is, you work for the AAS, you're doing public policy work for the society, for the astronomy community, doing some lobbying advocacy kind of work, some education work, and working with whatever the community needs and working with the government agencies, but it's also meant to be a way of educating an astronomer in the policy world and transitioning them to the policy world if they so choose. Although you don't have to go into policy after the Bacall Fellowship. It also leads to astronomers with more policy knowledge, and then they can go back into the field and apply that where it makes sense. But it's meant to help sort of get more astronomers into policy, and particularly into federal policy. And then in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, I got my current job, which is with the House Science Committee, as I said. I got that as much then this is sometimes how policy jobs work. It was as much out of timing as anything. I work for a committee, and I don't work for in the office of a specific member of Congress. I work for the chair of the committee. Her name is Eddie Bernice Johnson. She represents part of Dallas, but I work for the majority side, which is the Democrats, and the timing worked out very nicely because I was coming toward the end of my Bacall Fellowship term, and then the way that committee staffing on the Hill works is that the majority party gets essentially 2/3 of the staff budget, and the minority party gets 1/3. So when the majority switches, which the Democrats had taken the majority in the House in the 2018 election, and so they were hiring up on the Science Committee, and so it worked out nicely for me. And so I've been there now for 3 years, three and a half years. And so I do a lot of different things. I work on a wide range of topics in science and space policy, essentially anything related to NASA and civil and commercial space. So I don't do just astronomy or even just space science any longer. So I've learned a lot about aeronautics and about the human exploration side of the house and dynamics of commercial space regulation, et cetera. So I do a lot of different things related to federal policy, congressional oversight, and developing legislation. So that's sort of the quick spiel, and excited to answer any questions that folks have.
Thank you very much for that, Ashley. And then last but not least, James.
Thanks, Gudmundur. Congratulations, all of you, on your Hubble Fellowships and Sagan Fellowships and Einstein Fellowships. Thanks for the invitation. I'm James Lowenthal at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. I was born and raised in New York City and in Connecticut. I went to Yale College, and then I went to the University of Arizona for my PhD, which I got in 1991. And I was observing at the telescope there when Hubble was launched, and my first postdoc was at Space Telescope. So in 91, I started there just as it was discovered that the telescope was flawed, and everything was incredibly dire and grim. And walking around Space Telescope, the mood was just as dark as it could be and depressed. And everybody thought, well, this is the end of NASA and we're doomed. And then along came all the fixes. And, I was among the skeptics who said that'll never work. But of course it worked. And, I had an exciting couple of years. And then I had a Hubble Fellowship at UC Santa Cruz for 4 years. And then I got my first faculty job at UMass Amherst, University of Massachusetts Amherst, in 1997. And I was there for 5 years on tenure track. And before I was up for tenure, another job opened up nearby at Smith College, which is part of the 5-college astronomy department with UMass and 3 other colleges, Amherst College, Mount Holyoke, and Hampshire College. And I knew already what Smith College was. It's a small liberal arts institution for women. And it had not proven to be a great match for me at UMass. In fact, when I got the job at UMass, we can talk about this more if you're curious and how all this happened and other options I was considering. But when I got the job at UMass, I was not sure it was really right for me. And I went into it sort of on a trial basis, and it was acceptable. It had some merit, but it was not a great match in ways that I'm happy to talk about. But it's mostly about the big R1 school versus what I have here at Smith. So I'm still in academia. You might say it's kind of splitting hairs that you chose this kind of academia instead of that kind. But for me, it made all the difference. So 5 years after I started at UMass, I was fortunate to get a job. A job opened up at Smith. Again, like Ashley, the timing worked. It just happened there was a job available. I applied for it. I was able to get it. And I switched, and I jumped off of the big research fast track into a particular niche of academia. Only 5% of college-bound high school seniors will consider a small liberal arts college. It's a small slice of American colleges and universities. But for me, it's a great, great match. And I've been here since 2002, so more than 20 years now, and I love it. It's a great job for me, and I'm happy to talk about what I love so much about it, but it's just terrific. I just wanted to add also, let's see, I'm married. We have a daughter who's 19 and just starting college herself at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. My wife and daughter are both artists and dancers and theater people, so we complement each other. They're not scientists at all, so our family mixes it up a lot. And I also spent a lot of my time doing things, not really astronomy, but that sort of uses my astronomy expertise, such as climate change, advocacy, activism, and also now, especially in the last 10 years, advocating for dark skies, protecting the night sky from light pollution, not just for astronomy, but for everybody in the world. Great. Thanks all for coming, and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that, James, and thanks to all of you. And I see that there are a lot of questions coming in on Slido, so keep those questions coming. And then especially here in the audience and then also online. So maybe we'll kick things off by taking a look at some of the top questions here on Slido. And indeed, the first questions that is, or the highest one on Slido right now is related, is for you, James. On the sort of, what does the faculty application process for a college like Smith look like versus an R1, and what are the differences, what the search committee is looking for, and things like that? Could you comment on any of those things?
Sure, it's a good question. Thanks. The process is similar in terms of structure and timing and so on, but it's definitely different in what they're looking for. The search committee, and I've sat on the search committee here at Smith several times, and at Amherst College, and then also at UMass before that. So I've seen both sides pretty intimately. And as you would expect, at a big R1 school, absolutely the main emphasis is on your research, your productivity, your promise as a researcher, the track record you have for publishing work, for developing new initiatives. What they have in common, of course, is everybody's looking for proof that you can develop a new research initiative beyond your PhD thesis. I would say that is a universal criterion. But at a small liberal arts college, they're going to put much more emphasis on your promise as a teacher. They're probably going to ask you to give a demonstration class. If they don't, when you come and give a job talk, they'll be looking at it through the lens of your ability to communicate and to connect to students, and maybe to innovate technology, or to demonstrate at least that, not technology, sorry, pedagogy, at least to demonstrate your awareness of pedagogical thinking and innovation. And at Smith, one of the mantras is there are many different ways to teach well, and all teaching is improvable. And they would be looking at a job candidate through that lens. At an R1 school, it's much less likely that would be discussed very much on the committee. I can talk more about that if you like, but I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, thank you, James. And I think that was an excellent answer. And then maybe for the others, and then another question is for the panelists that are not in academia in astronomy directly, how would you be able to expand a bit more on sort of the transition was between your PhD in astrophysics and your current job? I don't know if one of the others would like to jump in.
I can jump in there. So I found that the two most important things to transition, so I'm looking at it through the lens of a pure kind of software engineering kind of tech role, is basically I found that in academia, especially in astronomy, your relationship with coding can be very huge. You could be just babysitting the code where you kind of tweak parameters and run a simulation, but the code is already kind of written for you, or maybe you're maintaining something in Fortran, and maybe only a few people use it, and you maybe don't use GitHub, or you don't have code reviews, or you don't have unit tests, or, so I think that for me, and this is one thing that I'm very grateful for my PhD thesis, my PhD supervisor, Hanno, is he had very good coding principles, and he kind of instilled that into me. And so I think that the biggest piece of advice that I would give is the transition is a lot easier if you can basically learn as many of those kind of software engineering principles or coding principles? Do you use GitHub? Do you have code reviews? Do you kind of get feedback on your code? And if you have a triple nested for loop, maybe is there a better way to do that kind of thing? And the other important thing is about networking. I mean, similar to how in astronomy, when you're trying to get that next position, that next postdoc or whatever, obviously your resume and your CV makes a lot of difference, but equally as important is who you know. And so that was a big barrier to breach. If you don't know anyone in tech, then how do you kind of leverage that network to help get your resume at the top of the pile, or at least get some clarity on where you should be applying to and what might be a good fit, and et cetera. And that's, for me, where the boot camp kind of came in handy. But I think I would say for both of those cases, the sooner you can start, the better. And in terms of growing your network, I mean, people in astronomy leave all the time. And so kind of just keeping track of those people who have left and staying in touch and asking their experiences and asking for advice and things like that, I think can go a long way in terms of guiding you where might be the best direction for you to go.
Great. Thanks,
I
Ari.
might add, so for my, oh, sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
No, go ahead, Ashley.
So the transition, so I started as the Bacall Fellow essentially really right after I defended. And it was honestly, because it was right after I defended, I was pretty burnt out from research and just from everything doing sort of full-time researching. So it was very refreshing and kind of nice to be doing something very different. One thing I'll say as just a sort of general advice is that for non-academic, non-astronomy, and I think maybe limited to non-technical kind of positions that you're going into, it might be easier when if you're going to be coding or something or doing something else technical. A lot of us plan to try to have a toe still in astronomy, to finish that one chapter of your thesis that you know should be a paper, or try to keep up with the literature, and just kind of so that you could always go back, or you could do a little bit. That is very hard to do in practice, and I know people who have managed to do it, but it takes a lot of discipline, and you have to think about it essentially from the start when you make that transition. And most of us, like myself, still have that chapter of our thesis that could have been a paper, and it is not a paper. And you kind of have to just either let that go, or you have to be really, really disciplined about it, because it can be very hard if you're not doing science day in and day out. Once you get out of that cycle, it can be very, very hard to get sort of back into it. So that's one thing just about the transition. And if you're comfortable with that, that's also fine and great. And I'm not sad. I have some regret. Like, I wish that I had done that, but I'm not actually sad that I didn't. I made this choice, and I'm very happy with this shift. It's just something where I think we all think that we can have it all, and it's a hard thing to manage. Another thing just about the transition that I think I somewhat underappreciated is just the very different dynamics and environment of, say, quote unquote, the real world or real world jobs and workplaces versus, say, university and research institute kind of environments, where you have a large, even if your group itself is very small, you have a large community of people but who are all in astronomy, but at different career stages. There's sort of a default kind of social network available to you there. People keep odd hours. There's just, the academic world is a very unique world in terms of the sort of professional workplace, where everywhere else it's very different. And in positive, I would say positive, and, maybe non-positive ways, just different values around sort of social dynamics in the office and around hours, around working something closer to, 9 to 5 and work-life balance, things like that. And that's just something that's different, that you have to kind of get used to and be aware of the fact that academia is just is a very much different environment than really anywhere else.
Great, thank you for that, Leslie. Barbara, do you have any? Do you want to mention anything?
Yeah, I'll add a quick couple of things. So I've only transitioned. It's been 2 months now, and one of the things I'm getting used to is being someone who applied for grants to going to someone sitting on the other side of the table and grant making instead. And I feel like in academia, I was well aware of the boundaries inside which I operated. And in this new position, there are actually no obvious boundaries, which is great. But also that means I could be creating grants under any structure and in any field with this very broad and ambitious mandate of making the world a better place, which is a wonderful job to have, but in some ways very difficult, because how do you pick, climate science over astronomy, or how do you rank these things that are all very important? And so I'm really enjoying thinking about that, but it is not an easy answer. And I think the other thing I'm really appreciating is that a lot of things, again, in the quote-unquote real world, get done through relationships, so knowing people. You're not always appealing to a democratic, unbiased jury. There is a lot of things happen in conversation, and that is different, but also empowering.
Great. So maybe we have a number of different questions on Slido, but I just wanted to check if, in terms of making things a bit more interactive, if anyone wants to ask a question, that maybe they'll post it on Slido themselves. Anyone online or in person? If not, we can continue going down the Slido list. Seeing none, then the next one is, this is somewhat maybe that Ari and some of the others touched about on sort of GitHub and things like that. But are there any other sort of non-technical skills that you would recommend that like early career scientists similar to us that would be very useful for us to start sort of honing and developing now, as opposed to when they're actually needed? That have been useful in your jobs?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, and this is one thing that I actually feel that all astronomy people have an advantage over someone who maybe is getting a software engineering job and coming from that traditional computer science background, is that the number one most important soft skill that I have to use every day is communication. And I don't mean communicating to people in your collaboration who are already knowledgeable about what you're doing. But for example, when I'm going to build a new product, I first have to kind of get sign off from my product owner. And my product owner has an MBA. He comes from a non-scientist background, and he's a very intelligent person, but he doesn't have the vocabulary of the astronomer, the vocabulary of the software engineer. And so you have to be able to kind of explain the value, and kind of break it down so that he can understand what is happening. And you have to be able to distill it without losing kind of that generality. But, as astronomers, we have to present our work all the time. We have to show up at conferences, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say just a small tweak to maybe what you're already doing is, the more you can present or explain things to people who are not in your collaboration, kind of forces you to question maybe the language that you're using. Are you using like very heavy jargon? And so maybe you should try to explain things without using that jargon. Or maybe if you are a TA and you have to explain things to your students who are kind of much more junior than you, or maybe someone that you're mentoring and you have to explain things much more junior. I think that skill for me is the number one that I think you could start developing today.
Great. Yeah, that seems to be like a running theme of communication is extremely important. Both in science and outside of science. And any of the others, do you have any sort of tidbits or things like that to share?
Yeah, I'll add a few. So yeah, I think echoing that communication, I think storytelling is really important. Telling people things in a way that is both compelling and interesting, and gets them to buy into whatever you're telling them. And learning new things from scratch. This is another thing we do all the time as scientists. There's so many other things. Working in teams versus working individually, another skill you have. So maybe I'll say my overarching comment is that I don't actually think you need to do a lot of new things if you're thinking of transitioning away from academia. I think you need to step back and identify really the vast array of skills that we already develop in academia, and appreciate just how multifaceted you already are. I think when I was talking to people outside academia, sometimes they're just amazed at the range of things we do, right? We review proposals, we write proposals, we analyze data, we observe things. You're already very, very interesting and multi-talented. So make sure you appreciate that so you can tell someone else what those skills are.
Yeah, I would certainly echoing communication is definitely, it's going to apply no matter what, and it will be useful for astronomy no matter where and where else. One thing, and there's not sort of an easy word for it, but anything that you can do to step even just a little bit beyond just astronomy or just your work to get involved with an understanding and get an understanding of the ecosystem in which your work is done. And that might mean, doing some labor organizing, union organizing for postdocs on your campus and see what the dynamics are between different departments and what the sort of pushes and pulls are for a university. Getting involved in the getting even just an awareness of how astronomy as a larger community beyond just your own subfield or specialty, how priorities get set and how they get discussed and assessed. I mean, we just had the Astronomy Decadal come out, and so that's a great thing. If you haven't actually read it, it's a big, giant document, but actually sitting down and reading it and learning how it's got lots of really good information and just background on how the different agencies who funds what in astronomy and why and what those dynamics are. The missions of NASA versus NSF versus DOE are very different, and the astronomy that gets done at these agencies is done in very different contexts. And sort of familiarizing yourself with more than just kind of your lane, and that means engaging with other people and it might mean it might mean participating in some of those debates on priority setting or working with your university, with your cohort at your university, and setting better policies for science funding or for labor practices or for anything else, or getting involved in issues that are just bigger than just what your science path is. I think it would also be helpful for you in astronomy, because then you do get a better view of the context of the work that you're doing. It's not just the things that you particularly are fascinated by, but why are they important? How do they fit in? What are their relative priorities? Where are the sort of tension points? Why are things the way that they are? I think can be very helpful. You build skills in community organizing and consensus building. You learn just the lingo and the jargon. Just learning how university administrations works can be very helpful. It's very opaque until you are at a professor level sometimes, when you have to serve on committees. But learning what deans are and what the provost is and what they do and what their power, those dynamics can end up being very, very helpful, because they have a lot of relevance to a lot of different things, but particularly for policy.
Did I just see, is there a question? I don't know, James, did you want to add anything? I think there might also be a question online, but James, I will give you a chance to speak on this one, if you'd like.
And that's specifically about soft skills and skills outside of astronomy.
Yeah.
What I'm going to say is of course from my perspective within academe, but within my niche of academe, teaching, and there is so much to learn, and it is undervalued at big R1 schools, and it is celebrated at small schools like the one I'm at. And if you're interested in a teaching position, I love teaching. It energizes me. It is it's often what I go to bed thinking about, what I wake up thinking about, not just because I have to do it, but because I love it. I love being in the classroom with my students. That was true when I was at an R1 school, when I was at UMass, but that was not the institutional emphasis. There, the emphasis was on really getting the grants and getting the papers out, and the buzz during the discussions at lunch or at coffee was about the latest results, or Ask for PH, or your graduate students, not about the undergraduates, not about your classes. Whereas where I am now at Smith, it's all about that. It's in the air. It's about education. It's about teaching. It's about how it works. What what tricks have you used? What's the new pedagogical thinking in this way? What's the psychological evidence and child development about this issue? Whatever. So that's one thing that I really like about my situation now. And in order to get this job, I needed to be able to demonstrate awareness of some of those issues, passion for them. It certainly overlaps with the communication that my co-panelists have spoken about. Education, teaching, it really is a form of communication. It's something that I worked on a lot, even when I was a postdoc. I missed connecting with people outside of astronomy. So when I was a postdoc at Space Telescope, I started an outreach program in inner city Baltimore with a couple of my colleagues, and bit by bit, I sort of built up my own portfolio of teaching experiences and skills. And then when I landed in my job at UMass, of course I was teaching mostly big classes and not really getting the support that I felt I wanted and needed, and certainly not getting the emotional support from my colleagues and from the institution, but I was still getting the experience that then helped me get my job at Smith and helped with the transition to a fairly different atmosphere, still in academia, but focused on undergraduate education. And as I said at the beginning, that's the main thing that differs between a job search between an R1 school and the small liberal arts is going to be your ability to engage with undergraduate students and to demonstrate your passion about that. So happy to talk about more of that if anybody wants.
Yeah, thank you, James. So I believe Catherine Nugent was first, and then we'll go over for a question from Melinda. And Catherine, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So hi, thank you for talking with us. I have a question kind of specifically about transferring out of just doing research. All of you at some point made the decision that you weren't going to focus on research solely for your job, whether it's teaching or policy or coding. And so I'm curious how kind of that thought transition went for you, if that was an easy thing or a hard thing. And then also just many of us either will consider it or we are surrounded by people who are considerate. We are, advising undergrads or grad students who are considering it. So how can, there's this feeling that in some circles that if you leave, it's a bad thing or it's something that, should be like you failed somehow. And so how can we support people or feel supported either if we're considering it or if we're surrounded or mentoring students who are thinking about leaving? So just kind of talking through that process if anyone has any insight.
I can speak first, I guess. I'll keep it brief though, but in particular, I kind of had a little bit of an implosion after my second year of grad school and kind of realized that it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And this kind of touches on another question that I see on the board, which is, finding astronomy research deeply meaningful and, thinking about the cosmos every day and all these things. And I wasn't feeling that. And I realized that it kind of wasn't really working out for me. And so the things that helped me so first I did feel like a failure and I was depressed for a while. And then I found that talking to other people who had already left helped to realize that there's life goes on. People have left and survived. And so there's innumerable examples of that. And so connecting with those people and kind of hearing their experiences, I think empowered me that, okay, they've done this, I can do this too. And here's some tangible ways in which they were able to do that. And for me, I'm very much of a objective minded person. And so when they gave me some clear examples of things I could do today with my remaining time, and whether it's a PhD or a postdoc, I started kind of splitting my time, and especially with an honest conversation with my advisor, then they were kind of, I feel like most of advisors would be open to the fact. I mean, the hard statistics is that most people leave academia. And so being able to start splitting my time, or at least incorporating and seeking out projects that would be able to give me some of these other skills that I think I needed to pick up before I left academia, having that conversation with my advisor and kind of having them accept that as well made me feel less like a bad person, and also helped me establish a plan for, okay, how can we transition, and also make my supervisor feel like we're on the same team instead of I'm going behind his back to kind of do stuff. So communication and seeking out others who had left the field.
Great. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in? James, I see your hand is up.
Yes, sure. I definitely feel like an imposter sometimes when I go to a meeting. I go to a conference, and all my colleagues at the conference are from big research institutes, and they just do their research, and it's the next thing, the next cool thing, the next big telescope, the next big project, and they're using acronyms that I am still catching up on, and they're reading Astro PH, for breakfast, and I'm not quite there. I used to be, but I stepped off of that fast track, and I made a conscious decision to do it after being at, Space Telescope and Johns Hopkins and Santa Cruz and Arizona and UMass, big schools, lots of research, Hubble Space Telescope. I was on that fast track, and I made the decision to move to a small liberal arts college. I'm very fortunate in that it is still part of the 5-college system. And one of the questions I saw was, well, have you maintained your collaborations and contacts, and do you share that with your students? And the answer is yes. My biggest collaboration is still with UMass, with a couple of faculty members and students at UMass, but it's international. Yes, I keep my research going, but it definitely is. It was a sacrifice, and what I miss at a small liberal arts college is the milieu, the ambiance, the context, the matrix of the research institute, where you step out on the hall, and everybody you meet, you could probably ask a question about, Python or uploading to Astro PH or whatever you need to ask, or, the latest thing on the archive. That is not the way my life is now most of the time. And I feel it, and it hurts a little bit, but it's so worth it. In my case, for me, I knew I was making that decision, but it's okay. On balance, the things that I got completely outweigh that loss. What I got is a much richer, broader intellectual life. Yes, a research institution might be very intellectual, but it's a pretty narrow silo most of the time. I have conversations with people, all the way across the curriculum. And when I go to a faculty meeting, it's with my colleagues in English and French and art and music and everything else. And my institution even supports that so explicitly that I was able to co-lead a year-long project on the topic of fear. And my interest was because of fear of the dark and my work with dark skies. But we had people from psychology and politics and literature meeting on a weekly basis, students and faculty members. That's what feeds me. So for me, it's worth it. Feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome at a conference when I present my one research project, which is the main research thing that I'm able to keep going with my busy teaching schedule. That hurts a little bit, but it's still worth it.
Yeah, if I can add, I think something to appreciate is that your relationship with research will evolve as your career evolves as well. And so I think the postdoc time is this hallowed time when it's just you and your research, and you can really dig into it. And I was finding that as I was in early career faculty stage, and building my own research group, I was spending less time doing research and more time managing, essentially. And so as I left academia, I was going to miss research, but I think I was going to miss research anyway. And in talking about how to think about leaving in terms of failure or success, I'm going to tie it back to the other question about meaningfulness in what you do. And I think you derive meaning from your values. And so it's really important to think about what are the things you want out of your job and your life. And then if you sort of follow those in crafting your career, then it's not that you're failing out of astronomy, you're making a different choice, right? And so if astronomy and doing research is what really feeds your soul, then put everything into trying to do that. But also, I think it's a very inside academia thing to think that leaving academia is failure. Like, nobody thinks that. People outside think it's a very weird choice that academics make.
Yeah, I know for me, I thought about it, and for me, it was a bit more of sort of a natural evolution. Even entering grad school, I wasn't necessarily interested in being a professor and being sort of an R1 researcher type. I was very interested. I wanted to do research and be involved in science, but I also was interested in how I had done internships at JPL, and I was really fascinated by mission development and how we decide what missions to pursue, and sort of that whole world. And so, I mean, partially I chose Maryland for grad school in part because of its proximity to and relationship with Goddard, and I wanted to be sort of get into that world somewhat. And so I sort of evolved over grad school. But for me, I think it was always in one way or another that I was very interested in, that there were lots of things that I was interested in that I knew I could never settle on just one piece of science. I mean, I double majored in English in undergrad. I was never going to just want to do one thing. And that I found a lot of satisfaction in enabling science and being able to support this, because those are things that need to get done, the sort of supporting, making the hard decisions or evaluating science or looking at the bigger picture. That just was really satisfying. It was something that I always had found satisfying. So for me, it wasn't like I didn't have to have sort of that existential feeling in the middle of grad school that I know a lot of people do have, or in the middle of your postdoc. My advisor was mostly supportive. He didn't know how to support me, but could tell what I was interested in, mostly supportive of that. So I had an easier road in that sense. In terms of resources, certainly the professional societies have a lot of resources and a lot to offer. And at the meetings, so at AAS meetings, they always have several events that are built in about various careers that you can pursue. But also other resources that they have at the professional society. The Call Fellowship is one of them. And then it's not just AAS. There's the AAAS, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So they're science-wide, and they do a lot especially when it comes to science policy, but they do a lot in a lot of different areas, sort of science-adjacent areas, and support. And so even if you as a professor who took the sort of the so-called traditional route, don't know how to advise a student exactly on what they should do, those are definitely places with a lot of really great resources, and they're happy to support students like that.
Yeah, thanks all for the answers, and thanks, Catherine, for an excellent question. Then we'll move over to Melinda, who has a question in the audience.
Thank you so much. You guys touched on this a little bit, and I also want to just point out how much I appreciate, hearing the ways that one can pivot with a PhD in astronomy and have very fulfilling careers. I am a little interested in asking a slightly provocative question that you've already touched on, which is, what do you miss maybe when you look back at being at a research-focused astronomy institution? Your lifestyle must be very different. What things do you miss most about that lifestyle? It's good to know not only what's possible for us, but maybe what you give up. And there is some of that, right? There is some compromise there. Yeah, thank you.
I know that I miss, and it's sort of related to what I think James was just speaking about. It's somewhat, I miss being in an environment that is at a very basic level about learning. I mean, it is my job to learn new things, but learning for the sake of learning, that you can, unless, you've got a proposal deadline or something specific that you have to do, that you go to your weekly department colloquium and you're going to learn about something that you don't know whether it is just interesting to you. It's not necessarily something specifically, directly, immediately relevant to the work that you're doing. In my job, for the most part, if I'm going to learn about something, it's because I need to learn about it for a specific purpose, and you're just not in an environment where you have the time really where your job is to just learn. And I think that's something. Similarly, I am still very glad and happy in the pivot that I've made, but that is something that I've missed, that I kind of hadn't really, I think, given full appreciation for. And you find the part of the solution to that is just finding other outlets there, but just sort of being in an environment of learning and education for its own sake is something that I know I miss.
I'll also just jump in and say that the thing that I miss the most is, first, I completely agree with Ashley, but I'll augment to it by saying that at my job, it's always a compromise in terms of the time that it takes to get to the optimal answer. And so in academia, you're publishing a paper, you're progressing that cutting edge. And so if it takes, a month to get to that 95th percentile, and another month to get to the 97th percentile, and another month to get to the 100th percentile, then you take those extra months. But in my job, it's 80% is good enough, and then you got to deploy and move on. And so you never get that satisfaction of really getting above and beyond to that like cutting edge. And it's always about that compromise.
Yeah, thanks all for sharing that. Arpita and James, do you want to share anything? Totally fine if you don't, but
I'll pass. I miss very little about the big R1 scene.
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't had a chance to miss anything yet.
Mm-hmm. And so the next question is, how do you balance how did you balance the early career, academic career hustle, then moving 2 or 3 times for postdocs, the getting tenure track, trying to get jobs, be that in tenure track or outside, while trying to balance having a life versus like having friends, family, maybe getting a house and those types of things?
I can jump in. So I'll say that one of the reasons that I left after starting one postdoc, is because I didn't want to be bouncing around, because it can be very painful to make friends during your PhD or just live in a city that you're familiar with and then keep bouncing around to a random new place and you got to make friends all over again and all that stuff. But in the end, I think that just generally kind of speaking to friends, family, and more generally work-life balance is really learning how to say no and acknowledging that if you always kind of lean towards, well, what's best for my career, then you're going to have to make that sacrifice. And the older I get, whether it's through my job or I had my first son in February, is that it's always about compromise. Saying yes to something is always saying no to something else. And so really just taking a chance to meditate or just kind of really think through, if you're making this decision and it's a big decision, then what are you going to be saying no to? And is that worth it? And certainly when you're developing your career, I do think that there's times to lean more heavily towards building your career, but you can't always make that choice. And I think if you think that there's going to be permanent loss of friends and family otherwise, then I think that can be a tough decision and maybe the wrong decision, even if it means a great career opportunity. But that balance, I think, is within every individual person to decide. So I can't give a direct boundary, only just what worked for me.
Two words: constant struggle.
Yeah, that's a super personal sort of situation that is going to depend on each and everyone's situation and things like that. And thanks all for sharing that. I don't know if any of the others want to jump in. Totally fine if you do or don't. And,
well, I think Ari put it really nicely. So I would second everything he said. I sort of opted out in that Maryland is right outside of DC. I didn't move after grad school, even to go into the Book Hall Fellowship, so I didn't have to do that part. I think one thing that I struggled with that I think might be useful is just that I feel like you're in this constant sense of feeling that if there is an opportunity, that you have to say yes to it because it will never happen again, or that if you say no to one path or one job offer or one thing that sounds like it's the perfect thing, that means that's closing a door forever. Or saying yes to something is closing the door, all the other doors. And for the most part, that's not actually true. It feels that way at times, but it's just not that in terms of career. Like there will be lots of people there will be amazing opportunities for jobs. There will be other opportunities to give the talk that you think is going to be the one that's going to make or break your career. All of those things, it is there. It's always there, and it does not mean it's not as consequential to say no as sometimes it feels like it might be.
Great. Oh, James, I see that your hand is up.
Can I add a quick anecdote in agreement with Ashley? Around the time I got my first faculty job at UMass, I was trying to get another job at the Museum of Natural History in New York, which was in the process of building its new planetarium. And there was this young guy named Neil deGrasse Tyson who had, who was being hired as the new director, and they were going to build a new astrophysics program. And I thought, this is fantastic. It touches all the things I care about, education and research together in one, and at this cool institution where I grew up in New York City, and it just seemed perfect. And I almost got the job, and I didn't, and I was crushed. And I thought, that door is closed. But Ashley's completely right. 5 other doors opened. I got a job then that I didn't like, but that enabled me to blah, blah, blah. And where did it lead me? To a happy family and the job I have now. And I mean, I had no way of knowing. You can't know. 1 door closes, 5 other doors open.
Thanks for sharing that, James. Yeah. Next question is, there are jerks everywhere. Have you found that the density of jerks is greater in academia or outside of it?
I guess I tend to be jumping in first, so I'll do this one. I would guess that the density of closet jerks is the same, but I actually find that it's slightly lower at Bloomberg or in industry. I can't speak for all of the industry, but I think it's like the people who are openly jerks is lower at Bloomberg. And the reason why is because it's a big corporation. There's very, very stringent policies and procedures for if you harass someone, if you do this or that, then this is how we will deal with that. In academia, everything's a little bit more unofficial. You're just in a room with a bunch of other students, and like if something happened, then who do you talk to? Your supervisor? Do you talk to, what if your supervisor doesn't do anything? I don't know. Everything feels very official at Bloomberg. And so while there may certainly be a lot of assholes, then they don't do it because they might get terminated or fired or, compensation slashed or something like that. And the last thing I'd say is I think it's a false statement that because everyone's in astronomy because they love the universe and they want to, find the meaning of life or whatever, that therefore they're a good person and they're not going to be an asshole. I think that correlation is not necessarily true. And if you're in an industry, it's because you love money and therefore you're an evil person. And I don't think that is true either necessarily. So, yeah.
Anyone else have density estimations of jerks?
I mean, I work in politics, so it sort of depends on how you feel about politics. And I'm sure that people will have different opinions. I think I would say similarly that that outside of academia, there are both formal and informal consequences to jerkdom, assholery, whatever you want to call it, in a way that, in some ways academia is changing, but, sometimes, we all know that people can be jerks in academia in the sort of low-level way and in a high-level way, and they still get to go on and persist. In the real world, if you're a jerk, you're going to get fired, or you're not going. By working in politics, you can't be a jerk to everyone because part of your job is working with people and getting people to agree with you, or getting people to help you out, or getting people to go your way or something. And so you kind of have to at least act reasonably with each other in order to get anywhere and stay anywhere. And in the policy world, people gossip way more than in astronomy. And so people know the dynamics. And so, it's maybe harder to tell if someone is really a jerk if they're not acting that way. So yeah, they're more, secret jerks, but I think that there's, at least at a sort of baseline level, there's a level that you have to, that is essentially not accepted in a way that is sort of allowed for in academia. Although again, I know that's changing and things are changing, which is a good thing. But I'd say that's sort of my view on it.
Yeah, I think jerkiness is often proportional to seniority. I hate to say this, but at least, and also maybe there is a time component to this as well, where overall jerkiness is maybe going down over time. But I think part of that comes from a a very obvious hierarchy in academia where you kind of just need, you know what year somebody finished their PhD and where they did it from, and then somebody else went to a better school, and then there's some jerkiness quotient that develops between them. But I think outside academia, it's harder to very quickly attach numbers or worth to people like that, which is I think the better way, because you don't know what their experience is. They might have depths of knowledge that you're not aware of, and so people are, I think, less quickly dismissive of people that might seem junior or less experienced. And so, yeah, I agree that I think expressed jerkiness at least is much less. People are much more respectful.
Great. This might be an interesting topic potentially for a white paper or something, a comparison between academia and industry on jerkiness. But the next one is on if any of you have served on a hiring panel, and if so, what did you learn? What were you looking for? And are there any sort of things to look out for in terms of red flags and things like that? Maybe no one has been on a hiring panel?
I've served on plenty, but it's all been within academe. So
academia would be perfectly also within the limits of this question. So if you want to touch on a bit on the academic, I guess one of the questions that we talked about in the beginning was sort of related to some of those, but if you want to expand on any of that.
Sure. I guess it probably, let's see. I guess I would make the distinction again between my particular niche of the small liberal arts college, which I already addressed, and then the larger R1 scenario, where if you're applying for a faculty job, if you're coming out with a postdoc, what are they looking for? And I think it's, you'll often see in a letter of recommendation, this person is the whole package. That's what they're looking for. What does that mean, the whole package? It means that they're doing some kind of exciting research that has the earmarks of some kind of leadership at least the national or international level, where you're pushing some field forward or at least playing a significant role in moving it forward. But it also means that you have something to add to their curriculum, to their department. They might be looking for something very specific, but they might be looking for the package of a professor, which is also a moving target. So there used to be a lot of emphasis on fit. Are they going to fit with us? And what does that mean? It means, do we like going out to lunch with them for the rest of our lives? Because it might be a 40-year career. There's been a move away from that. Because of the obvious tendency towards biases, straight white men tending to hire straight white men because it seemed like a good fit. And obviously that doesn't support anybody's diversity goals. There's a lot more emphasis, I'm glad to say, in most departments on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thought goes into the process usually before the hiring, even before the interviews begin. So I'm happy to say now, you're more likely to get interest on the basis of the actual merits of what you have to offer. But it's usually intellectual diversity, some kind of breadth, the ability to connect, to communicate with other people when you're at your interview, to explain what you do and understand what others do. And you want them to feel good about you. So again, this is a little bit about if you're a jerk, you better keep it in the closet. It's about the communication. You're going to have to think about how to communicate your work and ask follow-up questions of others so that you're really getting a little bit deeper than just the superficial. All of those things are going to make it easier for them to say, this is the person we want to spend the next 20, 30, 40 years with.
Yeah, Gumi, maybe I can add something about hiring in academia versus non-academia, but only from an interviewee point of view. So I think in academia, we're careful to try and make a rubric for the requirements. There's all these parts of the application, like reference letters play a big role. So what the community thinks of you, the number of papers you've written, there are all of these metrics sort of outside of yourself that can bear witness to your body of work. But when I interviewed for this position, they only talked to me. And so it came back, I think, some of the things we've been talking about, so storytelling and being able to communicate my soft skills and my experience on my own. And they actually didn't ask for any references. I think they checked with Space Telescope to make sure I was actually employed there, but that was it. And so it comes down to your presentation and ability to tell your story and kind of, put a nice cover on the book.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Arpita and James. And then we're getting close to the end. Maybe one sort of quicker question specifically addressed to Ashley in sort of the position at the U.S. House of Representatives and things like that. Is that like how tied is that to like the specific status of the House? Like if the House changes, does that mean that there is like that you will be in risk of maybe that there will be fewer jobs available there? And are there issues with jobs insecurity in those areas and things like that?
Yeah, so the short answer is there's no guaranteed job security. I am a federal employee, but I am not a civil servant in the traditional sense. If you are familiar with like the NASA, like the civil service, like GS scales, there's no standardization of pay scales. I am not on any kind of contract. I don't have any of the sort of protections that civil servants have, where like they can't just be fired for political reasons. By definition, I am in at least a moderately political position, and I can be fired at any time for any reason. Now, it's not, the committee staff in particular tend to have more job security. So it is true. So this is an interesting time of a lot of uncertainty for the Hill, and it depends on what kind of position you work in, but certainly if you work on the Hill, I mean, there's a lot of change every 2 years, no matter what, even if there's not a change in who controls your chamber. Members retire, members move on. There's a lot of churn. For my particular job, so like I said, if the Democrats were to lose the House, they would have a smaller budget for their committee staff. Some of that is tied up in sort of the staff and the resources needed to actually run the committee, because when you're in the majority, you run the committee, you decide what hearings are going to happen, and you like do the sort of administrative functions of that. So as a policy staffer, my job is a little bit safer. There's also a lot of uncertainty because our committee chair, Eddie Bernice Johnson, is retiring. She's been in Congress for almost 30 years now, and she chose to retire. And so we will have, no matter what, we will have a new lead Democrat, either chair, or if the Dems lose the majority, it would be the ranking member, is what you call the highest ranking minority. And the chair can, if they want, clean house and bring in all their own staff. That's not typical for something like this. There's a lot of value in having institutional knowledge. So again, the probability is on my side, but there's no guarantee at all in that sense. So stay tuned. We'll see.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As with politics, things definitely depend on sort of the current lay of the land and winds and things like that. And so we're getting close to the end, and I wanted to give any of you just a brief then opportunity to, if there's anything else that you would like to mention as we close out. I see that that James raised an interesting point. I mean, there are a number of, we only touched upon a few of the questions that are on the slide. There are many more. James was asking if what might be a good way to respond to the offline anonymous questions. So maybe one question would be for the career panelists, if any of the fellows might potentially, if they have a burning question for you, would it be okay for us to reach out maybe in an email, and if there's a burning question and things like that, and if so, what might be the best way to reach you? So maybe if you want to say any closing words and things like that, then we can share, if you're willing to do so, we can share the contact information for all of you. We can touch base offline on that, and we can share that with the full Slack space of the fellows. So if people have burning questions, then people can might be able to reach out to you. But yeah, then just in the last minute or so, if there are any sort of closing remarks and things like that, that if you want to share anything in the end.
I guess I usually go first. So my closing remark is, if you're thinking of leaving academia, it's going to be okay. I think even though, a lot of people do leave academia, I think the percentage of people who have astronomy PhDs who have a job of some kind is very high. And so I think it's really just a matter of, with the time you have left in academia, try to figure out what direction you want to go in. I mean, all the panelists here have very different directions. All of us are, I presume, happy with where you are. And you have a lot of skills, whether hard or soft skills, and you have a lot going for you. And so I think it's really just about finding which way you want to go, doing that research and that kind of introspection. And then once you kind of made that decision, then as much runway as you can give yourself to kind of build those skills in that direction, I think is valuable.
Yeah, I'll say enjoy this time in academia. This is a fantastic fellowship that gives you such a great opportunity to really think about all sorts of complex problems about the universe. But also keep in mind that there are a lot of really interesting jobs out there, lots of things you've never heard of. And so I'd really encourage you kind of along the way to start talking to a lot of people outside academia as well. I'm certainly still hearing about career pathways I didn't know existed that I wish I'd heard of, and I might have gone a completely different way. And so reach out and do a lot of informational interviews. I think most people are happy to talk to you if you're sincerely interested in learning about their career paths, and try and map out, kind of as Ashley mentioned before, the context around the science that you do. And lots of times you can tick off all of the things that you love about your research in other positions as well.
Yeah, and certainly speaking for myself, happy for if people want to reach out with other questions. So you feel free to share my contact info. I can also share with you all my personal email address if there are things that sometimes there are questions or discussions that you might not want to have on a government email address, which is fine. And just want to say that, yeah, there's a wide, even just in the policy world, even just thinking about science policy versus space policy, which are in some ways different worlds, somewhat surprisingly. There's a wide array of things that you can do, not just, what I'm doing. I have just one little piece of it. And there are ways to do it with, even while you are still in the field. I mean, James is a great example of someone who is, leading in a lot of ways the astronomy community's efforts on satellite constellations and figuring this problem out. He has come and talked to me and our staff on the science committee before about what they're doing with satellite constellations and the SatCon workshops, which have been, I think, really, really useful and incredible. So there are ways to get involved even as an academic and in research. So find areas where that interests you or that make you feel satisfied. And then just the last thing is that, in my experience, everyone who has left the field you ask them if they are happy that they left, and they are gushing, and they are very happy. And that's not to say that astronomy is terrible, but that just to echo that it will be okay, and that everyone I know who did really feels like it was the right decision for them, and they are happy. That if you have been on that sort of fast track and on that track, and you feel like there's no way to possibly be happy outside of the field, but if you're miserable where you are, I really think that the other side, you will be happy on the other side.
I guess I'm going last. Ashley, thank you for that comment about the SatCons and our ability to connect. And we already had a background, you and I, when I was active in AAS leadership, and you were the Book Hall Fellow. And then it was so great when you moved into this position where, guess what? We've got an incredible ally who is a trained astronomer on the House Science Committee who totally understands this issue. And it was really a rich opportunity that I think we together made the most of. I was really happy I was thrilled. It's just that it was a pinnacle of my life to be at UC Santa Cruz as a Hubble Fellow. But then I have absolutely no regret about leaving the fast track of research world. I'm so happy where I am now. Ashley, you're absolutely right. And I just want to echo what RP said earlier, which is you have to identify your own values and follow your own values. If you're not happy doing what you're doing, why are you doing it? What's the point? And the hard part may be figuring out why you're unhappy in your current situation and figuring out what the move is to make. But why would you regret that? So power to you all. Thank you, and happy to have all of your continued contact and to read about your careers.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. We know that your time is extremely valuable, and we're very thankful that you came here and spent all this time with us and answered all these questions with us. We're so thankful for that, and I would say let's thank all of our panelists for an amazing panel. Thank you all again. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
All right, there aren't many of us left in the room right now, but if you are giving a talk tomorrow and you haven't uploaded it, please do that tonight. And there